Welcome back to another walkthrough. This is our second Chapter 4 Excel walkthrough, Aquatics. Let's begin. We'll go ahead and scroll down to our Week 6, Chapter 4. Go ahead and click on My Lab IT Course Content. And let's click on Excel Chapter 4. And this time we are going to work on the Excel 4G Aquatics homework. We'll download our materials. And remember, do not download all files. We're going to go ahead and download each file individually. Now, once again, just like we did with the last assignment, for Mac users, you will be using a different set of instructions or different instructions throughout the worksheet. For my Windows users, notice that this right here says keep or discard. Let's go ahead and keep it. This is our database. My Mac users, you won't be using a database. You will be using the CSV file that is attached to the instructions or downloading starting materials. All right, let's go ahead and open up our student file. And make sure you hit Enable Editing. And let's begin. So we've already done step 1. Now for step number 2, it wants us to click on cell A2. So I'm going to go ahead and click on cell A2. After we click on cell A2, it wants us to insert a recommended pivot table by choosing the blank pivot table option. So anytime we want to insert something, we will go to the Insert tab here, click on Recommended Pivot Tables. And from Recommended Pivot Tables, we are going to click on Blank Pivot Table. So now we are going to build our pivot table. It wants us to add the month field to the filters area. So let's go ahead and drag the month field to the filters area. It wants us to add the pull field to the rows. So I'm going to click and drag it to rows. And it wants us to take the item field and move it to the columns area. So I'm going to click and drag item to columns. And it wants me to put the amount field in the values area. And notice how it now built our pivot table out of those different options. It actually took all of this information right here, which has no rhyme or reason, is not really sorted properly, and made it into a more usable chart, more usable table. So now on step number 3, it wants us to format the values in the pivot table. So let's go ahead and highlight our values. Let's click and drag all the way down, highlight our values. And we will go to our Home tab here. Under our Home tab, under the number grouping, we're going to click on this little guy right here, which is our number format dialog box. We're going to click on number. It wants us to do 0 decimal places, so we'll put a 0 in the decimal places. And it wants us to use the 1000 separator. Once we've selected those options, go ahead and hit OK. For number 4, it wants us to insert slicers. Now what slicers do is it allows us to drill deeper into this information using easy to use buttons. So to insert these slicers, let's go ahead and click to deselect our values. Make sure you are selected, or make sure you are clicked inside of this pivot table. We're going to come up here to the Pivot Table Analyze, and we are going to click on Insert Slicer. And we want to put a check mark next to Pull and Item. So check mark Pull and Item and hit OK. So now we have our 2 slicers. So it wants us to, I'm going to go ahead and move these over a little bit so they're not on top of each other. It wants us to filter by Tropic Pool and Spa Fees. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Tropics Pool, and I'm going to click on Spa Fees. And notice now it will filter it down to only include Tropics pools and what their spa fees are. It wants us to move the slicer so that the upper left corner is in the left corner of E3. So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to get the move handle. Notice the 4 arrows pointing away from each other. I'm going to click, hold, and drag it. And bring it so my cursor is, or this pool slicer is inside E3, just like that. It also wants me to move the other slicer, the item slicer, to G3, right next to it. So I'm going to move it right there, make it right next to it. Boom. Now it wants me to make a copy of this worksheet and name it Tropics Pool. So I'm going to come down here to where it says Sheet 1, or whatever sheet this is that we have our slicers and this smaller pivot table. I'm going to right click on Sheet 1. I'm going to hit Move or Copy. I'm going to create a copy and hit OK. And now you should see Sheet 1 with a parentheses of 2. We want to rename this, so let's go ahead and right click on it and hit Rename. And let's rename it Tropics Pool. Make sure it's Tropics Pool. Make sure you capitalize the T, make sure you capitalize the P. Once you've typed it in, hit Enter. Now let's go ahead and click back on Sheet 1. It wants us to clear the filters from the slicers and then remove the slicers. So let's go ahead and click on the Clear Filters button right here. And let's go ahead and hit the Clear Buttons filter here. And now let's go ahead and delete these slicers by clicking on one of them, hit the Delete key, and click on the other slicer and hit the Delete key. Both of them are gone. And we want to rename this sheet, so let's go ahead and right click on Sheet 1, hit Rename, and we're going to rename this 2Q Revenue. Make sure you capitalize the R for Revenue, and hit Enter. So moving right along, we are on step number 6. It wants us to insert a pivot chart. So make sure you are clicked on this particular pivot table on 2Q Revenue. We're going to go to the Insert tab. From the Insert tab, we're going to come over here to our charts. We're going to click on Pivot Charts and Pivot Chart. It wants us to insert a stacked column chart. So let's go ahead. Right here we have a clustered column chart. Second one over is a stacked column chart. Let's go ahead and click on that. And let's go ahead and hit OK. It wants us to move this chart to a new worksheet. So we're going to come up here to our Design tab, our Pivot Chart Design tab, hit Move Chart. We're going to put a dot next to New Sheet. And we're going to name this 2Q Revenue Chart. Make sure you spell it correctly, capital R, capital C, and hit OK. So now that we have our chart on a new table, or on a new sheet, it wants us to apply the Layout 3 chart layout. So I'm going to come up here to my Design tab. From my Design tab where it says Quick Layout under Chart Layouts, I'm going to select Layout 3 right here. So to add our data labels, let's go ahead and hit the plus sign here and put a check mark next to data labels. It also wants us to hide all of the field buttons on the chart. Let's go ahead and right click on one of these buttons here, the month button. Let's go ahead and right click on that. And hide all field buttons on chart. And that will get rid of all of our field options. We want to give our chart a title, so let's go ahead and click on the chart title. And click on it again to put our cursor inside there. Let's delete that. And let's type in second quarter Aquatics program revenue. Once we typed in second quarter Aquatics program revenue, let's go ahead and deselect our chart title. It wants us to insert a custom footer, so I'm going to come to my page layout tab. I'm going to click on my page layout or our page setup dialog box button right here. Under header footer, I'm going to choose a custom footer, and I'm going to put the file name, which is this button, in the left section, and hit OK. And hit OK. So there we are. We have our pivot chart based off of our pivot table into Q revenue. So now on step number 8, it wants us to add a new worksheet to the workbook. To do that, we're going to come down here where it has the plus button next to Aquatics revenue right here and click on it once. Notice it will add a new sheet for us. Here we want to import data from another source. In this particular case, for Windows users, we are going to import it from our Access database. For Mac users, you are going to import it from that CSV file that we downloaded. So for my Windows users, let's go to the Data tab here. And let's click on Get Data. And let's click From Database. And From Microsoft Access Database. It should be under our Downloads folder. Let's go ahead and click on our Downloads folder. And here it is, our pool supplies. Make sure you select on Pool Supplies and hit Import. It wants us to load both tables, so let's put a check mark next to select multiple items, put a check mark next to each one of these tables. Click the down arrow and hit Load. And what that will do is it will load our data into Excel. Once again, for Mac users, follow step 8 on how to import the information